Welcome to the Dalen Show. What's going on, everybody? So good to see you. Welcome to the Dalen Show. If you're new, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It's free and it allows us to keep having conversations like this in the future. Welcome to episode number 19 of season 5, which is so crazy to say. In normal circumstances, that would mean we would only have one more episode to go. But since it's the 5th year and the 5 year anniversary, I'm doing things a little bit differently. So we will continue to be pushing out some episodes throughout the season. So again, if you're new, welcome to the Daily Show. Appreciate you so much. If you have not checked out episode 18 with Nick Winger, go check that out. Super fun episode. Brought him back on the show for the first time in about 4 years. Chatted about so many different things. Great time. Great to see my man Nick. Without me chatting too much, man, let's introduce our guest for today's episode, Mr. R.J. Morgan. Woo! So good to see you, have you on the show. First of all, just how you doing, Mr. Morgan?
I'm doing great, Dalen. I appreciate you having me on.
No, I appreciate you for coming on. This is a long time coming. It's gonna be fun. We're gonna have a lot to talk about. We're gonna have a lot of laughs. We get to learn a little bit more about you as well. So this is gonna be fun. First off, RJ, just really quick for people watching or listening that may not know a lot about you before we get into everything that there is to decipher about you, who you are and your story. Could you just give like a brief introduction about yourself, just maybe where you're from, what you do right now, and just maybe some things you've been able to accomplish over your life as well to get you where you are today?
Sure. Well, I'm Dr. R.J. Morgan. I'm an instructor here at the University of Mississippi in the School of Journalism and New Media. And I'm director of the Mississippi Scholastic Press Association, which means I'm in charge of high school journalism, coordinating high school journalism activities across the state. So high school newspapers, yearbooks, broadcasts, literary magazines, etc. We do contests and conventions for school media programs all over the state. And let's see, 4 years ago, I also founded the Integrated Marketing Communication Association here at Ole Miss, which is a very similar organization, but national in scope. And instead of high school newspapers, yearbooks, broadcasts, et cetera, instead of having contests and conventions and helping students with journalistic content, that organization helps them with strategic communications and marketing content, marketing communications content. So PSAs, logo designs, T-shirts, marketing campaigns at the high school level. We sort of work with schools all over the country on that type of stuff. How did I get here? Is a question that I ask myself at least once a week. But really, it all kind of started when I was a freshman in high school, and I needed an elective and had a desire to be on the school newspaper. Counselor suggested it, and so I went and talked to the newspaper advisor and ended up getting on staff. And the first stories that I wrote for my high school newspaper were a recurring column on professional wrestling. Ringside Chats with RJ as a high school freshman was my first byline, and after that, I sort of got addicted to it, and eventually became the editor of that of my high school newspaper, and then worked at the Reflector when I went to college at Mississippi State, and eventually became sports editor there, and from there I went into the classroom at Starkville High School and taught high school journalism for 6 years and did newspaper, yearbook, and broadcast. And what I enjoyed about that was this educational experience that I'd had at my own high school through the student newspaper was so impactful for me. It really taught me, I tell this story all the time, but, school, I was always a fairly smart kid, but I've never really applied myself because school, it was just not something that I really cared all that much about. Miss Robinson, my English teacher, wanted me to read Julius Caesar And then I was going to take a test on it and then write a paper on it. And she was going to evaluate how much I knew about Julius Caesar when it was all said and done. The problem with that is I didn't want to read about Julius Caesar, and I didn't care particularly what Miss Robinson thought about what I thought about this book that I didn't want to read in the first place, or play or whatever, But in newspaper, what I found out really quickly is now in this class, they're going to take my homework, the stories I write, and they're going to print off 1,000 copies on newsprint with ink, and paper, and then they're going to sell it and pass it out to all of the people all over my school, all my friends, all the girls I was interested in dating, all of that kind of stuff, And so this homework in this class, I probably ought to take seriously because it's going to have my name on it and it's going to be public facing. And so through taking it seriously because it was a public facing class, I just learned so much. It really helped me grow up and mature. And so through that newspaper class, I learned, how to talk to people, how to hit deadlines, how to organize my thoughts, how to organize my notes, how to tell a clear story, whether it was a factual story, how to go gather facts, how to interview people, how to talk to not just my peers, but adults, people in the building, other teachers, administrators, community members, coaches. I did a lot of sports reporting, and so I learned all of those skills. And then once I became editor, well then everybody else's stories were also my responsibility, and everybody else's, whether somebody remembered to go get that photo of the soccer game last night didn't really have anything to do with me, but it's my concern because I'm the one that's going to have to lay out that page, right? And so it taught me a lot of leadership skills. It taught me a lot. I got a lot of value out of high school journalism. And so by the time I had sort of wound my way around, done a lot of sports writing, and developed journalism skills on my own, by the time I found myself in the classroom, I just really wanted to create the same type of learning environment that had been so impactful for me as a high schooler. And so I did that for 6 years and really enjoyed it. I got a lot of pride about the time that I spent at Starkville High School. And so as part of that, I got this flyer in the mail for this organization called MSPA, the Mississippi Scholastic Press Association. And so I started bringing my students to Ole Miss to these contests and conventions that MSPA puts on. And the director at that time, Beth Fitz, became one of my most sainted mentors and really helped grow me as a professional and as an advisor. And then when she retired, I was able to step into this role. I moved to Oxford. I took a job teaching classes here at the university and been here ever since.
I don't even know where I want to start.
A lot to unpack, yeah.
But I think bases off the top of my head that you were talking about is IMC, Integrated Marketing Communications. I get so many of the questions of what is that, what is it kind of marginalized around, et cetera, from people that are, coming with their kids to come see Ole Miss, or, people that are just coming to the School of Journalism that may be alumni, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
For you, what does IMC mean for you personally? And as well, take me back to the starting up process of that. Like, what went on? Like, how did that even become an idea for it to become a reality in terms of what IMC is now at Ole Miss? Like, how did that process start to become what it is today?
Sure. Well, I'll answer your second question first, because that process was started before I got here. Mm-hmm. But in general, what IMC is integrated marketing communication. So this is when you're thinking about how does a brand or a company or a corporation, how does an entity communicate strategically across a lot of different platforms, right? So think about Starbucks. So Starbucks has different communication points or different touch points that its brand has with its customers, right? So there's the physical process of getting the coffee, but there's also the logo, there's the style of the cup, there's the way that the store is set up, there's the way that Starbucks positions themselves in the market, right? Do they want to be the high-end coffee? Do they want to be the coffee of the people? Do they want to be, an elite brand? Or they want to be so different ways that however Starbucks wants to position themselves is going to affect how they communicate. And how they communicate is going to bleed into, lots and lots of different areas. That's not just how you communicate in your print advertising, but it's also how you manage your social media feeds, the tone of voice you use on your social media feeds. What about commercials? What is the ultimate goal of a commercial of Starbucks? What kind of emotions are they trying to elicit? All of those things. And then, think about Starbucks. I'll continue using Starbucks as an example, but think about how Starbucks manages its internal communications. How does Starbucks corporate communicate with its stores? How do they communicate with their employees? Do they engender goodwill, or how do they want what values do they want their employees and their storefronts to have? And so it's all a coordinated thing, right? There's a lot of different moving pieces to that, and so that's what IMC is. IMC is a blending of a traditional marketing degree with a communications emphasis, graphic design, general business as a minor. You sort of come out of an IMC degree with this cornucopia of skill sets that allow you to sort of move in and out of different spaces and different brands, but it's all strategic communication. So PR, marketing, a little bit of journalism and communications, a little bit of business. It all sort of rolls up in a nice pig in a blanket.
How have you seen the integration of the IMC program at the School of Journalism kind of bring a different maybe out value or just a different variety of things to the School of Journalism in Ole Miss that maybe I won't say was lacking before, but maybe just brought a different energy and light to the school that maybe wasn't here before the program was brought into.
So I moved here and took this position in 2013. Mm-hmm. The School of Journalism and New Media was founded in 2010. Mm-hmm. So before that, the University of Mississippi had a Department of Journalism since 1947. And that department had sort of evolved over the years, obviously to include broadcast, et cetera, but it was journalism with some PR and things all flowing out of the same department. When they created the IMC degree in 2010, that expanded this into the School of Journalism and New Media. And now there were going to be 2 degree programs, right? You're going to have a journalism degree and an IMC degree. Well, when you're first starting out, you got to recruit students and you got to kind of get things off. And it's going to be 4 years before you can even have any graduates coming out of that degree. So by the time I got here, the very first IMC majors were just getting ready to kind of graduate. And so those are, sort of the few, the proud. And we were a school of, 500 or 600 students at that point. Fast forward 10 years, and here we are in 2025, and we're a thriving school of more than 2,100 students, the majority of which are IMC. And we also now have a 3rd degree in media and communication. And so sort of by happenstance, I've been here, got here at a pretty pivotal moment and have sort of watched this school grow from really its infancy into the large campus power that effective student school that it is today. It's been really cool to watch.
I want to go back now. You really caught my eye talking about your journey through high school and how you were able to kind of cover wrestling your freshman year. Talk about that experience. Tell me just what you were able to learn about journalism and your work doing that, and also just how enjoyable was doing that for you for it being that young of an age to kind of cover wrestling and also kind of find something that you really love to do.
Sure. I'll pause just a second. I realized that I forgot to answer the first part of your last question, and that is, having said all of that about IMC, I'm sitting here as the director of the Mississippi Scholastic Press Association, watching all of that growth and all of that development and the power of these IMC skills in our graduates. And so it occurred to me that we needed an organization that would help brand and ground the University of Mississippi as like being ground zero for these type of skills across the country. IMC is the largest major on campus. It's also the largest undergraduate IMC program in the country.
Yeah.
And so when you get a degree in IMC from the University of Mississippi, that this is a destination place to come for that skill set. And so it only makes sense that the national home at the high school level of IMC would flow out of the School of Journalism and New Media here at the University of Mississippi. So right as the pandemic, where it was coming out of the pandemic, we sort of had that idea before it paused for a couple of years, and then we're now in like year 3 or 4 of offering those contests and developing that organization. And so that's something I'm really, really proud of. But to pivot back to your question about my high school experience, it was just so fun, Dalen. It was just like the rest of my classes that I took in high school were just so boring that I didn't really, not all of them. I mean, and I had some really great teachers. Okay, I went to Pearl High School in Pearl, Mississippi, right outside of Jackson. I had an excellent educational experience to the point that my experience in the Pearl Public School District, is what led me into wanting to be a teacher and wanting to give back and wanting to do this with my life. I just had such a wonderful, valuable experience. But the crowning jewel of that was was my high school journalism class. And what separated it, you're asking me kind of what was fun and stuff about it. I mean, I was a 14-year-old kid, and so getting to write and talk about the very niche things that I was interested in, which at the time was professional wrestling and The Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin and all of those guys. My freshman year of high school, my birthday party, we had a Nitro party, a WCW Nitro party, which was this like contest thing that the wrestling did. And so we had a little wrestling ring set up in my living room, and we had all the friends over. Anyway, we submitted the video. They ended up putting us on television and sent me a swag bag, and I've still got some of those cups and posters and stuff in my home office, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But so it was just something I was into, and I thought that was really interesting. As of now, at the age of 41, sort of kind of reflecting on how all this has sort of come together. My teacher at the time, Sandy Davis, when I got on staff, she said, "What are you interested in?" And I said, "Professional wrestling." And she sort of laughed and said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "I'm dead serious." And she said, "Well, then write about that." And so it wasn't like this top-down thing like it was in other courses where I valued Julius Caesar, I value Shakespeare, I value the Pythagorean theorem or whatever, and you need to know this, and so I will tell you what you need to know. In a journalism course, it was, what do you want to know? What do you want to talk about? Now go find out more information and learn how to talk about it. And so that flipped model where I was in charge of my own education and of finding and gathering information and teaching myself, and then using the information I had gathered to teach others, was really, really impactful on me.
I want to know who throughout your lifetime have been some of your favorite athletes ever. I know you're a huge sports fan. I know you watch a variety of different sports too, but who have been some of your favorites, whether it was growing up, now that you just sat back and really enjoy watching their game, and it brings great joy for you to sit there and watch them do what they do great?
Okay. Well, my first sports heroes were probably Andre Dawson and Ryan Sandberg and Mark Grace and all of those early 90s Cubs teams. Mm-hmm. My dad grew up a huge Cardinals fan. Mm-hmm. And so when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, he was sitting me down and explaining the game, and I was all excited. I wanted to be into the same things my dad was into, And I remember I asked him, I said, "Well, Dad, who's your team?" And he said, "The St. Louis Cardinals." I've been a St. Louis Cardinals fan since I was a little kid. And so then my response, which you could probably do some sociological experiments on these kind of things, but my response was, "Okay, who's their rival?" And he said, "The Chicago Cubs." And I said, "Okay, that's my team." So you probably do some whole sort of research case study on sons that take their father's team and sons that take the rival of their father's team. But the Cubs are really kind of the first team that I was in love with, but I've always sort of been, I guess, to that point, a contrarian. So then when I was in high school, everybody was an Atlanta Braves fan, and so that meant that I couldn't stand the Atlanta Braves, right? And so the other good team at the time was the Yankees. This was the Jeter and Torre and Mariano Rivera, that whole era. They won 3 World Series in a row.
Yeah.
And so they became my favorite team. I also love New York City. It's always been my favorite city. And so I sort of adopted the Yankees as my team. And my favorite Yankee was David Wells.
Okay.
David Wells was a pitcher in the late 90s, early 2000s. He bounced around for several teams, but he pitched a perfect game for the Yankees in 1998 in their record-breaking season. And I just always loved David Wells, primarily because he was a fat guy, if I'm just being honest with you. This fat pitcher that could get out there and throw a perfect game and be as good or better as anybody. I was always a fat kid. And so I just really identified with David Wells. He became one of my favorite all-time players and still is. And in football, in Jackson, Mississippi, everybody is a New Orleans Saints fan. And so I had no interest in being a New Orleans Saints fan. And the Houston Oilers had just moved to Tennessee and became the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah.
And their quarterback was a young man named Steve McNair, Air McNair, out of Mount Olive, Mississippi. And so here was this new team with a cool logo in a cool city with a Mississippi quarterback. And so I pretty quickly became a Tennessee Titans fan. And then in their first season, the Music City Miracle and the exciting playoff run. And so I've sort of been a Titans fan ever since. So those are some of my earliest things. And then going into the New York thing, the other one that I really identified with and fell in love with was Patrick Ewing. Okay. I'm a huge Knicks fan, and Patrick Ewing was, again, because he was just so big, and I liked big guys because I was a big guy. Mm-hmm. And Patrick Ewing was a dominant center. They never won a championship because Michael Jordan hogged all of those. But Ewing was a first ballot Hall of Famer, and he's still one of my favorite players to this day. I just love anything Patrick Ewing.
Yeah. I really was captivated by you telling me just the progression that you had in high school in terms of working and virtue different things in the journalism field. How important is it, whether it's a kid that's in high school, in college, to gain experience, and whether or not it's experience in something that they don't know they like or not, but trying it out and figuring out, okay, I like this, I don't like this, doing something that they love, et cetera, et cetera. How important is it for a kid to have experience in high school and college to get prepared for the real world in terms of the things that you were able to learn from your time in high school and even in college as well in terms of getting ready for the real world?
Well, think about it. When else are you going to do it? When else are you going to experiment with different things? How else are you going to learn what you're into and what you're not, and what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, unless you go try it? If you're a sports-minded person, well, you need to go try a few different sports and see what really clicks, right? So if you're more of a creative person, well, you ought to try a lot of different things, and you ought to try to put see where your hands go and see where what clicks, right? I was also in the choir in high school, and I haven't sang in a long time, but I don't know that I was that great of a singer then. But I was in the choir and I was in the chamber singers, and what I learned in terms of organization and like being part of a group, that the choir at Pearl was an elite group, led by an excellent director. And so from her, I just sort of got to watch and learn leadership skills. And we were able to travel, and I had friends and, made social connections. And so, but if I had just said, I'm not that great of a singer, I'm not even going to try, I would have never had all of those life experiences or all of those life skills. So I just feel like it's really important for students in high school and college to get out there and see what sticks, right? None of this is permanent. You can do something for a season or for a class or a semester, and just see if it's something you like. And if it's not, move on to the next thing, right? That's what this phase of your life, that's what high school and college is really about, experimentation and sort of figuring out who you are. And an important part of that is figuring out who you aren't, right? And so the only way you're going to figure that out is to sort of try a few things and fail at a few things and figure out what you're good at and then move on from there.
I love that because I am Mr. Perfection in my own head, and it's so easy to at this age to feel like you have to have it all figured out, and if you don't have it figured out at this point, you're not going to get where you want to be in 5-10 years. So I appreciate you for sharing that because that's real, and I think it needs to come from people around your age range to people like my age to tell them it's okay to experiment. It's okay to learn and fail and say yes and say no and et cetera, et cetera. So I appreciate you for saying that because it's really important, especially nowadays. I think that the gravity of social media has really kind of changed the outlook of my generation in terms of how they view the future. So I love that you shared that.
That's a really good point, and I'd like to point that out, that it is a little different. The pressure on you is a little different than the pressure that I would have had coming through, matriculating through high school in the late 90s and early 2000s, where it was a print product.
Yeah.
And so we were going to hand it out to my school, my classmates, and maybe those people took it home to their parents to read, or maybe some community members picked up a copy, from Walgreens on the counter or something like that. But it wasn't like people in California were immediately able to see, evaluate, and critique the musings of my 14-year-old body on professional wrestling, right? I was not trying to build a national brand around myself when I was 14, 15, 16 years old. I was trying to articulate messages for my immediate peers in my school. That was my target audience. And so one thing I think we do a disservice to students today is like, I know how to communicate professionally and nationally, and I know everything I say, sort of out there, and I need to communicate that to you. But that doesn't mean that everything you do is really ready for the prime time, right? Like we ought to. There should be some things that we sort of work on behind closed doors, not in a privacy way, but in a developmental way. Everything doesn't have to be. You're not trying to win the Super Bowl right out of the gate.
Yeah. Take me to high school, senior year. What is the process of you choosing where you want to go to college, and how does Mississippi State end up being the final decision for you?
Oh, I wish you hadn't asked me that because the answer is so terrible. So I was a high school senior. I'd been editor of my high school newspaper for 3 years. My entire career goal was to become a sports writer, a sports journalist, and that was really all I cared about. Now, if I had done even an afternoon's worth of research on journalism programs and quality journalism programs and where I ought to end up, I probably would have ended up maybe at Ole Miss or maybe somewhere out of state. But none of that was of any concern to 18-year-old RJ. The only consideration for 18-year-old RJ was Mississippi State football. I was a diehard Mississippi State football fan. And so the extent of my research in terms of college choice was, does Mississippi State have a journalism program? The answer was yes. Okay, that's where I'm going.
Yeah.
And so, even in senior year, I went up and met with, took a college day, went up and met with the program, met with the advisor. Frances McDavid was my advisor, and she was excellent. And so I don't mean to insinuate that I didn't have a great education. But one thing she did, she encouraged me immediately. She said, classes are fine, majoring in journalism is fine, but the way you will become a professional journalist is to go get a job with the campus newspaper and get reps and experience and develop yourself and your skills through doing not just sitting in a classroom and learning. And I've taken that with me, everywhere I've gone. And that's sort of the ethos of the School of Journalism and New Media, right? Our motto is real world right now. We want you guys, we want students to be focused on doing and learning through doing, not just sitting back and learning definitions and theory and all that stuff, all of which has a place. And you certainly learn, I hope you learn some of that stuff too while you're here. But we want you to get out in the field and start talking to people and interviewing people, just like you've done entrepreneurially with this excellent program. This is the kind of thing that students need to be doing if they're going to succeed after they get out of here. So that's sort of how I ended up at Mississippi State. And immediately, as soon as I got the first week of classes, first week I was on campus, I walked over and applied for a job and got a sports writing job at the Reflector. Little fun fact, the same day that I was hired at the Reflector as a freshman, they hired another sports writer. And so the two of us came in as freshmen together. The other sports writer they hired that day was Ross Dellinger, who's the national college football writer for Yahoo Sports. So a pretty good day. If you were putting together a sports staff, you add Ross and I, and Ross far more than I. But you add both of us on the same day, that changes the complexion of that staff. So I spent 4 years, as a sports writer there, and then was sports editor, and that really was maybe the most impactful space and place and group of people and experiences that I've had in my entire life was the work I did for the Reflector.
Could you just talk about that in your time at Mississippi State? Just what did it mean to you? What were you able to learn? Just how impactful was it truly on who you are in terms of a person, but as well as your career right now as well?
Sure. So, I started off as a freshman, and so you kind of have to work your way up through the ranks, and so my first beat, this is the first series of articles that they allowed freshman RJ to write. Well, it wasn't even covering a real sport. They asked me, the PlayStation 2 had just come out, and so they asked me to take the college football game on PlayStation 2, start a franchise with Mississippi State, simulate the entire season, and then write about those simulated games. And so each week, our real coverage would go right alongside on the page with my simulated coverage of the fake season that we were having. And Mississippi State was not very good at the time. This was the tail end of the Jackie Sherrill era and the early years of the Sylvester Croom era. And so we were a pretty ragtag bunch in terms of football talent.
That's honestly not a bad story idea. I don't mean to interrupt you, but that's actually not a horrible story idea, honestly.
Well, I thought it was pretty good. But it did get a lot. I'll tell you, it worked, and it was kind of cool for about 2 or 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And then it got really confusing because anybody that wasn't really paying attention and hadn't been really paying attention for the rest of the semester, all of a sudden I was writing stories about games we won that we absolutely did not win.
Yeah.
Our simulated season, I think we went to a bowl. In real life, we most certainly did not. And so it got a little confused. But it was a cool experiment for the first couple of weeks, Yeah. And so, but I could have proved myself, and that I could turn in things on time, that I could do stories on deadline, and that they, made sense. They were logical and grammatically correct and all that kind of stuff. And so then starting in the spring, they moved me into softball. And that was my beat. And so I covered college softball. And I went on the first day of practice of the semester to the softball coach, Jay Miller. He was a former coach of the softball Olympic team, U.S. Olympic team. Wow. He had taken the job at State. He was a brand new coach. And I went up to him the first day. I said, look, I'm R.J. Morgan. I'm going to be the beat reporter for the Reflector. I know you know everything about college softball. I know nothing. And so if you will explain this game to me, and if you will explain your decisions and, why things are the way they are, the strategy, blah, 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 I said, I will give you everything I got. And he was so kind, and he did. And so, they would win or lose a game, and then I would wait around for 15 or 20 minutes, and then I would interview a couple of players, about whether they, what won or lost, whatever, how they felt about it. And then I'd go sit in the dugout with Coach Miller. and he'd explain to me, and kind of unpack the game for me. And it was a really good education. So I did that for a couple of years, and my fall beat became the volleyball team, which I also really enjoyed covering, and got to make a lot of connections and interview people. And all of that was just really getting reps in storytelling, right? So sports is planned news events. If you show up at X time, there's going to be a winner and a loser, and there's going to be some stats that go along with that. And so you just got to focus on how to tell the story. What's the story within the story? And so I got a lot of good reps for all of that. Then Ross eventually moved into being our sports editor, and so I moved in to being the football beat writer. And then when Ross graduated, I moved into being the sports editor. And so that's sort of the career trajectory. So then I covered football for the next couple of years. And at the time, and this is probably a little more common then than it is now, but there were all of these publications that needed stories about Mississippi State football. The Memphis Commercial Appeal, the Birmingham News, the Jackson Clarion Ledger, the Associated Press, several recruiting sites, and some of those had beat writers, full-time dedicated beat writers, and some of them didn't. And so I started picking up, the sports editor typically picked up, and so when I was sports editor, I picked these things up, freelance gigs. And so I would write a practice story on Tuesday for the Commercial Appeal. I might cover a baseball game on Wednesday for some of the Maroon and White magazine or something like that. So I started picking up all these freelance gigs, and so it wasn't just that I was a sports editor and laying out my section and assigning stories and managing all that. I was also getting all of these bylines from all of these different publications around the country. I became the first campus blogger for Sports Illustrated. They were starting a network of campus blogs, and so when they did that, I was the sports editor, and so I kind of fell into that job. I fell into the Associated Press job, and then I graduated and became a professional, but I didn't leave Starkville, and so the Associated Press said, well, why don't you just keep writing for us? And I said, okay, that's great, And so I did that. I covered football, basketball, sometimes baseball for the Associated Press for the next 16 years, well into my time, all through my time in Starkville and well into my time at Ole Miss. I really just finally let go of working for the Associated Press. Told them I just couldn't do it anymore in 2022. Coming out of the pandemic. But to answer your question, that all of that experience was the most professional development experience that a person could ever get, right? And then the other piece to that was being in a community, being part of a community of other journalists, other student journalists who were trying to do the exact same thing, right? And so, you had, I became, close friends with the entertainment editor and the news editor and the opinions editor. And we'd all spend, 20 or 30 hours a week together laying out these newspapers and assigning stories and whatnot. And so we all just became sort of best friends. And so those are still some of my closest professional friends to this day, are the people that you sort of come up through the ranks with in student media. And so, I just, my experience with student media, college and high school, were just the most valuable educational experiences I have. And I can't even imagine what I'd be doing today if it weren't for those experiences and opportunities. It would be far less successful or fun.
You do so much in terms of, you talk about the Scholastic Press over the years, covering the American South, sports, the AP. But I really want to know, why teaching? What got you into teaching? What inspired you to become within the educational rings? Why did you? What inspired that? What was the move for teaching? Why did you want to become a teacher?
That's a really good question. I guess it would be a few things. One, as I said, would be that I had such an excellent high school experience myself. And so I remember, coming up through high school and thinking, I could see myself doing this. I could see myself in a classroom. I could see myself right now. It wasn't at the time what I was primarily planning to do.
Yeah.
And I particularly remember being a high school senior and thinking about the job of a high school principal, somebody who was sort of tasked with being, the educational leader for all of this, for this community, the Pearl community. And I remember thinking, even as a high school senior, that is something, being a leader in education, running an academic unit, a school, a district, a department, whatever, was something that I really pretty quickly said, that's something I would like to do. And I think I can make a difference. I think that's an area where I would be strong. The other reason, I guess, why teaching is, and I didn't have the vocabulary or the words or whatever to make this connection when I was 18 or 22 or even 32. It's only been in the last few years that I've sort of figured this out. But the job of an educator is really the same job as a journalist, right? So when I started as a classroom teacher, I found that, this process looks a lot like what I would do to prepare for a story. I would, if I was going to write a story about any given topic, sports or non, well, first you have to have an idea, what is something that's interesting or something I don't know or something I'm curious about. Then, okay, who could I go and talk to about that, or what sources could I gather, what information could I gather about that? And so then you gather everything you can find, printed, sources, human sources through interviews, data, whatever. And you sort of jostle all of that around in your head, and then you put it down on paper, or on camera, or whatever the case may be. But, a journalist is really gathering the whole of information. Here's what we understand and know about this topic at this very moment. And then being able to explain it to the public, to people who don't know everything that I just learned. And so what I found once I got in the classroom is, dang, that's exactly what a teacher does, right? I'm going to go out, and so for my social studies class, my Mississippi history class, my economics class, my English or journalism class, whatever the topic is that we're studying this week, I'm going to go out and I'm going to prepare, and I'm going to gather all the information I can find about that until I'm satisfied that I know what's going on. And then I got to turn around and figure out, okay, now what's the best way to explain this to people that don't know it and maybe don't want to know it, right? A student doesn't necessarily. So what is a way that I can frame all of this in the most entertaining or engaging or interesting way possible? And that is exactly the same skill set that a teacher uses when they're preparing lessons as a journalist does. And so over time, I've kind of realized that when I was doing all of those when I was learning all those journalism skills, what I was also learning was how to be a really good classroom teacher. And so that's sort of how I look at things.
Yes, sir. You could have dinner with 3 people, dead or alive. Who would they be?
3 people, dead or alive. I would have to go with Willie Morris, late Mississippi author, Bob Dylan, musician and songwriter, and probably Bill Clinton. He was president. He was a president from the South during my junior high and high school years, my formative years growing up. And so having a Southerner in the White House, like the generation before, sort of has that same affinity for Jimmy Carter. But I could really see myself in Clinton. And so, I've just always sort of had an affinity for him as a leader. And so those are probably my 3. Yeah.
Okay, I love that. Those are 3 answers I've never heard before, so that's really different. I love that, actually. I love Bill Clinton, obviously, being from Arkansas as well. So
Yeah. Town called Hope.
I would, And if you could, as best as possible, just, I know it's been over a decade now to Ole Miss. Just what has it been like for you over the last 12 years now, to not only just come to Ole Miss, and I know you've now earned a PhD at Ole Miss as well, but just come make an impact, change the kind of the landscape of the way the School of Journalism and New Media is viewed at Ole Miss. For you, when you got here, I'll ask this more specifically. What did you expect? Did you have any goals when you first got here? And now, 12 years into the journey, what's it been like for you?
That's a good question too, Dalen. When I got here, I don't know that I really had any expectations or goals other than just like when I started my first job teaching, being a classroom teacher in Starkville. My goal was just to do a good job.
Yeah.
I really, really, I get a lot of identity, I get a lot of value, a lot of personal worth out of doing a good job and being a good public servant. And that's sort of how I was raised.
Yeah.
And so I just want to do the best job I can. I try not to have a agenda or an ego or any of that kind of stuff. It's whatever is best for the institution is sort of how, or the organization is sort of how I want to approach things. And so I try to think big picture, and then how can I fit into that big picture? How can I be of use to that big picture? So, when I got here, I was focused mainly on MSPA. And building and developing that network of advisors and growing that organization into what it is today. I was also teaching in the school, but I was looking around and, I barely felt qualified to be here. I mean, I'm walking the halls with, Joe Adkins and Al Steele and Curtis Wilkie and Charles Overby and, all of those guys, Deb Winger, all of those kind of people. That have these storied careers and are known far and wide. And I'm just this little old kid, when I started working here, I was 29 and far younger than most people are when they get into a job like this. And so I was able, so part of that was being young and really being focused on my lane, but being observant. I was able to sort of sit back and watch and learn from a lot of those people that I just named. I was able to sort of learn from their wisdom, sometimes learn from their mistakes, if I'm being honest, but learn from the majority of the time from their wisdom and their excellence, and be able to sort of go, okay, well, maybe I do belong. Maybe this is a place where I can bring value and where I can affect change, and that has really been what has kind of sustained me and kept me here for 12. Now I'm in my 13th year. When I came here, I had no intention of staying this long. It was really going to be, maybe 5, maybe 10 years. This was a good first administrative job, something that was different from being an assistant principal, but this was something that something I was passionate about and something I could sink my teeth into and gain some administrative chops. And then I was going to go on and do the next thing. But then the school sort of embraced me and wanted me to stay, and I felt the same way, and so here I am.
You may or may not have an answer to this question. That's okay if you don't. But do you have an end goal? I know you are working on a collection of different things behind the scenes in terms of a book and et cetera, but do you have an end goal maybe in general, maybe your career, things you're working on behind the scenes that maybe you hope to accomplish one day? Do you have an end goal for anything that you're currently, in the process of at the moment?
I don't really like the framing of an end goal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think life is about end goals.
Yeah.
I think having goals are important, and I think having trajectory is important. Mm-hmm. But you can't know today. First of all, I don't know today how much longer I have left on this planet, and neither do you. And so, if we could wave a magic wand and you knew the exact date that your earthly body was going to expire, then you could backtrack from there and you could plan out, here's where I want to be on the day I die, and here's all the things I want to accomplish before then. But we don't get that. That's impossible. And so, you just have to think about goals and trajectory, right? And so I don't know where I'll end up. I don't know. I don't know what the ceiling is. I don't know what the end goal is. I don't know where any of this leads. I just know that I have projects that I'm passionate about. I have things and ideas and people that I'm passionate about. And so, for as long as I'm able to be here and serve, not just in this building, but on this planet, I plan to continue pursuing those, and when it's all said and done, we'll see how far we got. Is how I kind of look at things.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to make this as specific as possible and try not to make it broad. But what has been? It could be as a teacher, it could be as a writer, but what has been the moment where maybe a kid has come up to you or given you something or said something on a card and you were like, this is why I wanted to become a teacher, or even as a writer, you were able to maybe win an award, or maybe have someone that you loved to read growing up and they or came and showed you, give you your flowers for your work. What has been a moment or a few moments throughout, whether it's your teaching, writing, anything, that you just sat back and be like, that was awesome, or that was why I do what I do every day?
Sure. And I'll tell you, Dalen, I've been lucky enough to have several of those over the years, several pinch myself moments, of I can't believe I'm in this situation. One that immediately comes to mind was once I started working here and working with other journalists around the state, getting to become, sort of friends, I guess, with guys like Rick Cleveland, Marshall Ramsey, Billy Watkins, a lot of the names that, Jerry Mitchell, a lot of the names that young RJ would read in the paper every morning on the way to school end up as these heroes that I held up as the reasons that I got into journalism. That I thought that this was such a cool career path. All of those names, for us to have like a two-way relationship, not just a one-way relationship, that they know who I am and I know who they are, and we can have like a conversation. That still amazes me. Yeah, as somebody who just kind of grew up with these guys. Charles Overby. Charles Overby was the editor of the Clarion Ledger that won the Pulitzer in 1983. Which was when Mississippi passed their Education Act and got statewide kindergarten. Well, I was born in 1983, and so I'm a direct beneficiary of the work of Charles Overby and William Winter and all of those guys in the early. And so now to be like in a position where I've worked closely with Charles Overby as a managing fellow of the Overby Center. I mean, that kind of thing just feels like a fairy tale, to me. So there have been several moments like you're describing throughout the years. But one just the other day that I guess is sort of on the top of my mind is when I started teaching at Starkville and took over the newspaper and the yearbook, and we eventually started a broadcast. I was really close with my first group of students, because they were only a few years younger than I was, really. I was 23, 24, and they would have been like 16, 17, and so we sort of bonded, and we had a great, and we did some work at that publication that I'm still really proud of. But I was only there for 6 years. They were really impactful, really exciting, but now I've been here for 12, and so just recently and over the years, I've kind of asked myself as I've matured and grown as an instructor and as a professional and just as a human, I wonder how all of that actually came off. If I was making an impact or if we were just having fun or whatever. And it was just recently, just in the last few weeks, my very first newspaper editor from Starkville at the Jacket Buzz, his name's Zach Mitchell. He sent me this really long Facebook message telling me that he's now he just turned 30 and is works in Memphis, and he had just written this. He's always been a music guy and in bands and stuff. And he had just written a music piece on another band, and had gotten it published. And that was a goal that he had set for himself in high school in my class. That when I get older, I want to write something. He's not in journalism, but it's sort of journalism adjacent. So when I get older, I want to write something that ends up in a publication that I read or consume, And so he wrote me this long flowing message telling me that he had achieved this goal, and that as he has gotten older and reflected on those years that we were together at Starkville, how impactful that experience was, all the things. And so I just thanked him so much. I said, Zach, that really means the world. I question all the time whether I was just, because I was so young and was just I didn't know how any of this stuff worked. I just know I wanted to do a good job. And so let's try some things. And he said, no. It was a very impactful learning environment. And so I guess that's probably the one that really gets me, is when your students tell you that you've made a difference in their life. There's nothing better than that.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. Even now, I've had a strong relationship with teachers. I always value my relationship with my teachers. So I'm always grateful to hear when you guys are able to get your flowers from the students, because at the end of the day, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I hope that's what you guys would do it for. So
Absolutely.
I love it. I really do. Before I get you out of here, I always do this thing called Fruits of Labor. It's 2 questions, but I'll just start with one. And it's kind of honestly in a way leading off something you just talked about, but legacy is something that's really important to me, and what I do, and who I am as a person, and just making an impact, but as well doing the things in the manner that I want to do them in a positive manner. So for you, what would you want your legacy to be? When people hear the name RJ Morgan, what do you always want people to remember about who you are as a person?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I have an answer. I would hope that they would remember me as a hardworking, kind, fair, intelligent person, somebody that went above and beyond to try to help the whole for the good of the order, kind of thing. And I don't know. That's a really good question, but sort of piggybacking off of something I said earlier, I also don't know that it's under my purview to decide what my legacy is. Other people can figure that out. My job is to do the best job I can every day. And you wake up and you do that. And that's something I've learned from studying Bob Dylan. Dylan has had this, a lot of people know about his 60s stuff, but he's still a performing artist at 84. And so you're talking about an artist that's got 60 plus years of doing it. And for a lot of people, for a lot of artists, once you get sort of past your commercial prime, then your shows and all that kind of stuff is really just sort of a traveling museum. It's your greatest hits played the exact same way they are on the album, yada, yada, yada. Dylan's not like that. Dylan constantly innovates, changes melodies, changes lyrics, constantly tours, certainly doesn't need the money, but does it just sort of for the love of the game, I guess, for lack of a better term. And so what I've kind of learned about the creative process and from being a professional and about legacy from studying Dylan is that Dylan is not concerned with legacy. He is concerned with creating, with being in the moment, in the mix, and doing the best job that he can. And now the best job, or what I think today or how I feel today, may not be how I feel tomorrow. And that's why it's so important to do it today. Tomorrow you can do something different. Tomorrow you can be something better. You can grow. You're always innovating. He not being born is busy dying. And so my job, as I see it, as a professional, as a human, is not to think about what legacy is or what big picture is, but just to think about how can I do the most good for the most people using the skills that I have or can acquire today. And if you wake up every morning and you do that, then over the span of a year, 2, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you will put together a body of work that is worthy of legacy. And other people will figure out what that legacy is.
Yeah, I love that. So the other part is just advice that you would want to give people watching or listening. Just something to maybe carry them on throughout their day or their week. What's something that maybe you would want people to know or to hear in terms of just something to give them a little bit of life moving forward?
What do you have to lose? I guess that's the some, just go do it. If you fail, well, then find something else tomorrow to be successful at. But you're not gonna get any better by not taking any risks. You're not gonna get any better by not getting any reps. So decide what you want to do and what you want to be good at, and just go do it. Avett Brothers have a lyric: "Decide what to be and go be it." That's pretty much what you have to do. About a year ago, I decided, sort of on a whim, that I wanted to pick up painting. Never painted anything before. Wasn't particularly, I took a couple of art classes and they were not my thing. Never have done it before. I've decided that that's something that I wanted to work on. And so in my free time, I do, little paintings or drawings or whatever. And the first few of them, there's actually still pretty bad. But the first few of them were real bad. But every time I paint something, or every time I draw something, every time I create something, it imprints a little bit on my brain of how, that little thing right there, that worked.
Yeah.
Now I need to figure out how to do that over and over and over and over again. Well, you don't get that unless you take risks and you get reps. And so my advice to anybody is to just get out there and do it. You're as good as anybody else. You just haven't had as many reps or as many practices to develop those skills. But you are as good as anybody else, and you're certainly no worse than anybody else. And so that's sort of what my advice would come down to, is decide what to be and go be it.
I love that.
Dylan says that you don't find yourself. Life is not about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. And I think that's a very poignant difference in distinction.
Yes, sir. I love that. Look, I just want to say thank you, and for joining me, chatting with me. I will say this: hopefully, this isn't going to be the last time, everyone. We will see RJ. There are, I think, so many other plethora of things that I would love to have him on and talk to him about. So you'll definitely see him on again in the future. This was just a little bit of a get to know him, and then we'll kind of, dive into a bunch of different things later on in the future. So we'll figure that out. But thank you so much for joining me. I enjoyed the heck out of this and able to learn some things actually that I didn't know about you as well. So this is super fun and grateful. So thank you so much for giving me some of your time today.
Anytime, Dalen. Great job.
Appreciate you. And again, like I said, if you're new, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, comment something funny so I can laugh as well. I really appreciate that. And appreciate you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed this and it was super fun, and see you guys soon. Take care, everyone.